This series contains adult language and descriptions of graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised. Hello, hello, Death by Southwest. My friends and, I want to say friends and lovers, but that's probably not appropriate, so I'll just say my friends. It has been way too long, and if you're listening, that means you stuck around somehow, and I just want to say thank you. It is taking everything in me to just jump right into this episode, because if you know me, you know that I just want to share everything that's been happening and where I've been and what's going on. But I'm not going to do that because it's October and it's my favorite season, and I want to jump right into this spooky episode. So if you were here last year in October, I think I did episodes that didn't necessarily take place in the Southwest, and we're going to continue that because while there are awesome episodes that take place here in the Southwest, I wanted to do some episodes that take place in October and or have a Halloween twist. So some of the episodes this month will be Halloween related. Some of them will just take place in October, and I'll let you decide what you think for today's story. Okay, long enough intro. Let's get to it. A man steps to a hotel rooftop rail on a warm October night and leaves the party mid-song. Minutes later, security finds a body and a note. A note with an address and a promise. You'll understand when you get there. Okay, that's our little cold open. Let's jump in. We are going to do a sense of place today because this story is not in the Southwest. I know we have a lot of Southwest listeners, and perhaps they are not familiar with this city. Personally, I've never been to this city. When I was a teacher, my old teaching partner, she was from New Orleans, which is the city that we'll be telling a story about today. And I've always wanted to go. It feels like a city that would agree with me. But all of this information that I'm about to share, it is either from people I know that have been there or from research I've done, not from personal experience. If you've ever been to New Orleans, you know that it's a city that feels very alive, even when it's quiet. Maybe it's the humidity or the way the air kind of carries the sound. Maybe it's the fact that New Orleans has seen so much death and somehow still manages to celebrate life louder than really anywhere else on earth. New Orleans sits on the southeastern edge of Louisiana, right along the Mississippi River, and just a stone's throw from the Gulf of Mexico. It's home to roughly 370,000 people, though on any given day, that number can shift and swell with the tourists who are drawn to New Orleans often by the promise of beignets, brass bands, and plenty of bad decisions. Founded in 1718, this city has burned, flooded, and rebuilt itself more times than most entire nations. It's a place that's been colonized, conquered, and reborn, shaped by French, Spanish, African, and Caribbean influences that all collided to create something that doesn't really exist anywhere else. And while the rest of the country might go hard for Halloween once a year, in New Orleans, spooky is not a season, but a lifestyle. You don't need cobwebs or fake blood when your city is literally built on top of the dead. And that is not an exaggeration. Because of the high water table, bodies are buried above ground in New Orleans, in elaborate white stone tombs that often look more like little houses than graves. Locals call them cities of the dead. You can walk through the St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, where Marie Laveau, the legendary Voodoo queen of New Orleans, is said to still grant wishes from beyond the grave. And often when people visit there, they claim they feel something in the air that's just alive. Ghost tours line the French Quarter every night. Stories of pirates, nuns, voodoo priestesses, and vampires echo through the cobblestone streets. Bars claim to be haunted by the spirits of their most loyal customers, and there's even a restaurant that swears its resident ghost still orders a Sazerac after midnight. But for all the folklore and theatrics, New Orleans' real darkness does not come from its ghosts. It comes from its past. This is a city that has been through absolute hell. Fires in the 1700s that wiped out entire neighborhoods, a yellow fever epidemic that killed thousands, and of course, Hurricane Katrina in 2005, a storm that was so devastating that even now, 2 decades later, it still feels heavy when you say the name. The water may have receded, but a lot of the trauma hasn't. And when the floodwaters finally did drain, they left behind a city that was both haunted and reborn. Many people say there is nowhere else in the world like New Orleans. By day, it's music and color and life spilling out onto the streets, parades for seemingly no reason, beads hanging from trees, jazz so good it could bring you to tears. But at night, it's different. The air thickens, the light changes, and if you walk through the French Quarter after midnight, past the flickering gas lamps and wrought iron balconies, which I love, you start to understand why this city is known as one of the most haunted places in America. Because in New Orleans, the ghosts, they don't hide. They dance. They whisper through the live oaks in Jackson Square. They sit at the bar next to you in Lafitte's Blacksmith Shop, the oldest bar in the country, which is lit entirely by candlelight. So cool. And if you listen closely, you'll swear you can still hear the ghosts laughing. So when you hear the story I'm about to tell you, and that it takes place above a voodoo temple in the heart of the French Quarter, in a city that thrives on the blurred line between the living and the dead, you realize there's probably no other place on earth that this story could have even happened. Because New Orleans isn't just haunted by its ghosts. It's haunted by its people, by the stories they leave behind, by the unshakable truth that in this city, life and death are always dancing, sometimes to the same song. Now, let's get on with our story. Before the note that I mentioned in our little cold open, the note with the address, the rooftop, before all the horror of this story that you're about to hear, there was Addie, a woman made of sunlight and storm, and the man who would love her so fiercely, it threatened to destroy them both. Adrian, called Addie Hall, was born January 15th, 1976 in Durham, North Carolina. Her dad was a Vietnam veteran, and her mom was, according to most records, a stay-at-home mother. And that is pretty much where the picture of a normal childhood ends. Addie's early life was rough, to say the least. Years after she was out of her childhood, she confided in friends that she had been sexually abused as a child, and the violence was so severe that before she even turned 13, she was hospitalized for a urinary tract infection caused by the assault. That's the kind of trauma that doesn't really fade. It just kind of calcifies. Addie learned early on in life that for her, survival meant movement. She never graduated high school, but she could sew, she could dance. She wrote poetry that was so raw and so sharp, it could slice you open. By her 20s, she'd adopted a kind of restless independence. If she ran out of money, she'd crash on a friend's couch. If she ran out of couches, she'd charm a meal or a tank of gas out of a stranger. She was bold, free-spirited, and unapologetically chaotic. The kind of woman who burned bright enough to make everyone else look dim. And I love that description of her. By the late 90s, Addie was back in Durham teaching salsa and ballroom dance, but her feet quickly started itching again. And by 2002, she had packed up and headed for New Orleans, a city that kind of seemed to be made for people like her, the kind of people who often live too loud, love too hard, and refuse to stay in one place for too long. Once in New Orleans, Addie worked whatever job she could get: bartender, maid, waitress, anything that would help her pay the rent. She had various apartments over time. Her apartments were always kind of small, kind of like things were messed up or crooked, the kind with peeling paint, rusted windows. But she turned every rundown apartment that she moved into from a kind of crummy crap hole to a real home. She'd paint the walls, she'd hang her own curtains, she'd clean it until it shined. And it wasn't a house, it was a home. Every friend said the same thing about her, that she left every place better than she found it. But for all her warmth and creativity, Addie had another side. She could be extremely volatile, especially when she drank. Friends described her as a mean drunk, someone who would go from laughing to lashing out in seconds. And her taste in men was equally volatile. She once dated a man who, after she caught him watching gay porn, beat her so badly that he broke her shoulder. And she still stayed with him for a while, at least. Because that's often what trauma does. It tells you that chaos is comfort and that love and pain are close cousins. By the end of 2004, Addie's life was kind of spiraling. She'd gotten into a bar fight, cracked a beer bottle over someone's head, and burned quite a few bridges in the local scene of New Orleans. Still, she managed to get herself another job bartending at Hogg's Bar, a place where locals and lost souls mingled under the same light. And Addie didn't know it yet, but it was behind that bar that she would meet a man who would soon mirror every wound that she had. A man named Zack Bowen. Now, Zack Bowen looked like the kind of guy you could trust. All-American smile, dimples for days. He was well over 6 feet tall. A lot of reports say 6'10". That seems unbelievable to me. Others say 6'5", but he was tall. He was tan, broad shoulders, movie star kind of handsome in a I'm polite and I still call everyone ma'am kind of way. But looks, as we know, can be tricky, especially when they belong to someone who learned how to look totally fine on the outside, even when he's falling apart on the inside from a very early age. Zack was born on May 15th, 1978 in Bakersfield, California. He was the second son of Lori and Jack Bowman, who had married very young, apparently. In 1975, they had their first son, Zack's older brother, Jed, and 3 years later came Zack. When Zack was still in diapers, his parents decided to pack up their old VW bus and hit the road hippie style. They drifted from California to Idaho, sometimes parking on beaches, sometimes in Walmart parking lots. Jack, Zack's father, was chasing a dream of being an actor, while Lori quietly tried to raise the two boys in a moving tin can, essentially. Eventually, when the bus broke down, reality kicked in and the family kind of limped themselves back to Bakersfield, where Jack got a job in the oil industry. And he hated it. And that hatred for his work really festered until he quit and got a job bartending at a strip club, which, let's be honest, I mean, I can only speak for myself, but this isn't like the career pivot that most wives would probably be super thrilled about. I know that I wouldn't. But Lori stayed. She stayed. She always stayed. Until she didn't. When the family moved to Whidbey Island, Washington, everything between Lori and Jack finally cracked. Jack started staying out too late, drinking too much, and cheating. And by 1990, after years of resentment and silence, Lori finally packed up her things, packed up the boys, and took them all back to California, leaving Jack behind. At the time, Zack was 12 when this happened. He'd grown at this point into a tall, lanky, awkward teenager, kind of shy, kind of goofy. He loved Metallica and Tool, and he loved playing the drums until his hands grew blisters. And even though he was awkward, people liked him. He was funny, he was charismatic, and he was kind. By senior year, things were actually looking kind of up for Zack. He was getting straight A's. The girls had started to think that he was pretty cute. And somehow, which is, this is like way out of character for him, but he had been nominated for Homecoming King, which sounds kind of silly, especially maybe now as an adult, if you're listening to this as an adult, which I hope it's just adults listening. Um, this meant a lot to Zack. It meant everything to him at the time. It was something that he never thought he could be that person, the homecoming king. He'd moved so many times. He never really felt like he belonged anywhere. So when he was nominated, it wasn't necessarily about being popular for him. It was that he finally felt like people saw him. Sadly, he did not win. And that loss hit him harder than it probably should have. Definitely harder than anyone could have imagined. Again, it sounds small and trivial to lose the homecoming court, but for Zack, it wasn't. And something kind of cracked in him that night. He dropped out of high school just a few months before graduation and moved in with his dad in Washington. And even though he didn't know it at the time, this was probably one of his first real acts of self-destruction. Jack was trying to play Father of the Year now that Zack was back living with him. Jack, it's driving me nuts saying that. So Jack decided that the cure for Zack's kind of like aimlessness and depression was a road trip. So the two hit the road and ended up in New Orleans. The city had a pulse that Zack could kind of like feel in his bones: music, booze, tourists, and plenty of trouble. He fit right in. He got a job selling Go Cups on Bourbon Street, slinging drinks and flirting with strangers. And if you don't know what a Go Cup is, because there is an open container law in New Orleans, these are plastic or cardboard cups, containers holding alcoholic beverages that you can take in and out of the bar, drink on the streets, etc. It's basically a to-go cup. So he was slinging drinks, talking to, flirting with, getting to know strangers. And one of those strangers that he met on Bourbon Street was Lena Shupak, a 28-year-old stripper from Texas who came into where Zack was working to get a drink and left with Zack's phone number. Lena and Zack were inseparable for the next 3 days, didn't leave each other's side. And when she finally was like, I have to go home, and she did, Zack was immediately begging her to come back. And she did. And within months, Lena was pregnant. Zack was 18, barely an adult, and scared out of his mind. But when he held his newborn son, Jackson, something in him kind of shifted again, this time in a positive way. For the first time, he felt like he had a purpose. About a year later, in October of 1988, he proposed to Lena, and they were married later that month in October. And a few months after that, they welcomed a second child, their daughter, Lily. Zack seemed to have this idea that fatherhood could fix him in some way. At least initially, that's what he kind of thought or hoped. And no surprise here, it did not. The bills were piling up. He started working nights as a bartender to make more money. And that wasn't great for him because the hours got longer and longer. The drinks got stronger. He was staying out a lot more. And then one night he got arrested for drug paraphernalia possession. Apparently, he wasn't even using. It was stupid. He was maybe holding it for someone else. I don't know all the details, but the whole incident left him feeling ashamed and humiliated. His older brother, Jed, who had joined the army, said, maybe you need discipline. Maybe you need to serve. And that's exactly what Zack did. In 2000, he enlisted in the army. He passed training easily. He was sharp and athletic and charming. His superiors liked him. So he was deployed to Kosovo after training, where he uncovered mass graves and helped confront Serbian war criminals. Then came 9/11, and he was sent to Iraq. And Baghdad broke Zack. Like so many others, he saw things that no human should have to witness. Friends dying, civilians screaming. Once he handed a piece of candy to a little Albanian girl and later found out that she'd been executed for talking to an American soldier, which haunted him for the rest of his life. When Zack eventually came home, he was not the same person. He suffered from PTSD, chronic pain, and severe anxiety. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't stop replaying the war in his mind. He often felt as if he couldn't even breathe. But instead of offering Zack treatment, the Army gave him an other than honorable or general discharge, so not honorable discharge, stripping him of key benefits like the post 9/11 GI Bill and healthcare access. He had served with bravery and earned medals, and he felt as if the Army threw him out like trash. But in his mind, he came home to Lena, and at least he had her, right? Wrong. Lena was done waiting for him, done worrying about him. She took the kids and she left Zack, which devastated him. So he went after her. Not long after she left, he went after her, hoping that they could patch things up, hoping that he could repair this fractured family, because that was really all he felt that he had. But to no avail. Lena had already met somebody else, and she was not interested at all in repairing anything with Zack. So Zack was now 26, divorced, jobless, traumatized, and completely alone. So he did what a lot of kind of broken people who find themselves in New Orleans do. He got a job behind a bar. And that is where he would meet a woman that would forever change his life. New Orleans in the summer of 2005 was like a fever dream. Music poured from every doorway, tourists stumbled through the French Quarter, and that sweet rot smell that only Louisiana heat can produce was thick in the air, always. Inside Hogg's Bar, Addie Hall, a beautiful blue-eyed bartender with a fiery laugh, the defiance of a street fighter, and the energy of someone who is running from their own ghosts, she was behind the bar. She was barefoot. She was chain smoking, and she was giving side-eye to anyone who dared to order a light beer. And that is where Zack Bowen first saw her. Instantly, he was hooked. He was coming off a long night, still wearing his apron, and instead of going home like most people would, he stayed because she was magnetic. She wasn't the soft, approachable kind of beautiful. She had that beauty that kind of dared you to come closer. Dark humor, a sharp tongue, and eyes that looked like they'd probably seen too much. She was pure chaos, and Zack could not look away. Addie was not one for small talk, but she did like a man who could match her banter drink for drink. And Zack could do just that. He was charming, he was funny, and he was just damaged enough to seem really interesting. They started staying late after their shifts, swapping stories about war and heartbreak, trauma and bad exes, each of them genuinely impressed by how much the other person could take and still be standing. Their connection was raw and fast and felt a little dangerous. They were opposites and mirrors all at once. Two restless souls, both bruised, both unpredictable. And by July, they were inseparable. And that's right around when the weather reports started. And then the warnings. And then the name, Katrina. By August 28th, the entire city was shutting down. The hurricane had grown into a Category 5, and the mayor had issued a mandatory evacuation order. Everyone was leaving. Everyone except Addie Hall. She had stocked up on booze, ice, and cigarettes and was convinced the storm would miss them. She said she wanted to ride it out. Zack told his ex, Lena, that he'd be evacuating with her and the kids. But when he stopped by Addie's to say goodbye, she looked at him with those sharp blue eyes and said, "Cowards run. Real New Orleanians." Sorry, guys. Real New Orleanians. I said it right when I practiced this. Real locals stay. And Zack, the ex-soldier, the hopeless romantic, the person who was always addicted to chaos, took the bait, and he stayed. When Hurricane Katrina hit on August 29th, 2005, it wasn't the wind that broke New Orleans. As we now know, it was the water. The levees failed, the flood came, and in the poorer neighborhoods, roofs became lifeboats. Bodies floated through the streets. Downtown, people screamed for help that never came. The Superdome filled with thousands of desperate survivors trapped in darkness and heat. But in the French Quarter, where the ground was higher, it was another world entirely. The bars stayed standing. The streets were eerily empty, but largely dry. And in one tiny apartment on St. Anne Street, Addie and Zack opened the windows, sat there and poured whiskey over ice while the rest of the city drowned. Sounds a little bit heartless, but it wasn't. I mean, it was survival. And before they knew it, it wasn't just survival. It was actually their own kind of personal paradise. They built a strange little empire in the ruins. No jobs, no bills, no rules. They scavenged for food. They traded supplies with other people who had stayed behind. They cooked dinners over campfires in the street. Addie flashed her boobs to passing National Guard trucks, hoping to get more patrols for their block. They shared whiskey with neighbors and fed stray cats that they named after blues musicians. They even made the New York Times. A reporter came and snapped their photo. They were barefoot, sunburned, and grinning from ear to ear. The headline painted them as lovers who defied the storm. And for a moment, they were. They seemingly had nothing, but they were free, which was everything to them. But that freedom started to fade when the world started turning again. By September, the power was back on. People were coming home, and the real world was starting to return. And Addie and Zack, the lovers who had defied the storm and really thrived in the chaos, seemed to have quickly forgotten how to exist within the confines of the real world. The post-storm quiet was absolutely deafening for them. Addie started drinking more. Zack's PTSD roared back to life because there was sounds of helicopters constantly, sirens constantly, and it all took him right back to the war that he fought. He'd wake up in the middle of the night screaming. They'd gone from the adrenaline of survival to the monotony of existing, and neither of them knew how to handle it. But what they'd built during the storm wasn't built to last. They'd clearly been running on borrowed time. Because when two broken people mistake trauma for love, or we often say nowadays trauma bond, the storm doesn't end when the water recedes. It just moves inside the walls. Addie and Zack's street, which was once littered with debris and campfires and laughter, was now full of contractors and neighbors arguing with insurance adjusters. The French Quarter had survived, but for Addie and Zack, something sacred had died. While the city was trying to heal and repair itself, they were breaking down. Addie had thrived in this post-apocalyptic New Orleans. She'd been like the queen of the ruins, feeding people, finding joy in the wreckage. But when the lights came back on, it felt to her like she had to face the same demons that she'd been running from since childhood. The sexual abuse, the trust issues, the drinking that turned her from playful to volatile in mere seconds. And she didn't want it. She didn't want to live in that real world again. She wanted the Katrina world forever. And Zack, meanwhile, was unraveling quietly and slowly. He was this war hero with literally no honor, no benefits, no steady work, and no safety net. And every time he saw a soldier or heard the words, "Thank you for your service," it ended up making him feel like a fraud, which kind of chipped away at him bit by bit. The irony was not lost on him, though, that he had survived 2 wars, one in Iraq and one in Katrina, and somehow both had left him homeless inside his own head. By late 2005, things had turned around a little bit. Zack was working 2 bartending jobs and trying to send money to Lena, who was still raising his 2 kids, Jackson and Lily. And Addie did not care for this. She did not want to share Zack. She didn't want to share him with his ex. She didn't want to share him with his kids. She didn't want to share him with anybody. She was definitely the jealous type. And she wanted the version of him that she had during the hurricane back. The protector, the partner, the wild-eyed survivor who also only needed her. She liked it when it was just the 2 of them. So when Lena showed up one afternoon with a baseball bat demanding back pay and child support, Addie refused to open the door. Zack ended up meeting Lena somewhere neutral, which infuriated Addie when she found out. She immediately started drinking and drank until she completely blacked out. And this was kind of where those little splinters in their relationship, those little splinters in themselves started to grow. That's not the word I was looking for, but you get what I'm saying. Now, their fights started initially as little arguments, which we all have with our significant others, sometimes growing to shouting matches. Again, not out of the ordinary, nothing crazy. And then they started turning into all-out wars. Neighbors said they could hear things crashing through the walls at all hours of the night. Zack would storm out, sleep at a friend's house for a night or 2, and then come crawling back. Addie would lock him out, throw his clothes on the street, and then sob and beg for him to come back. It was the same cycle, unhealthy cycle, on repeat. Love, rage, sex, guilt, repeat. And when Addie drank, she didn't just argue. She went scorched earth. She'd throw bottles. She threatened to leave. She called him terrible names, told him he was a coward, which is one of the more minor names she called him. But it was like she wanted a fight. She wanted to spar with him. But Zack, for the most part, often did not take her bait, did not yell back. He'd go blank. He shut down. The soldier in him retreated. Stoic, calm, cold even. And that drove Addie insane. Oh, I relate so much to that, guys. Addie wanted a reaction, but he gave her nothing. And that, more than the drinking, more than the jealousy, that became their undoing. By mid-2006, Addie had been arrested after pulling a gun on a man during a drunken argument. She made bail thanks to her friends. But Zack, he didn't help. He didn't lift a finger to help. When she got out, she was angry, but took him back anyways. They were broke. They were using a lot of cocaine. They were pretty much living off of a diet of whiskey, coffee, cocaine, and chaos. Their friend, Squirrel was his name, a local dealer, kept them stocked in cocaine, apparently letting them rack up a tab that they would never be able to repay. Addie and Zack at this point had a toxic codependence on each other, chemically, emotionally, all of it. Now, during this time, there were moments, brief flashes, where the real Addie would show up. The girl who danced barefoot in the French Quarter, who painted her walls and gave stray cats names like Louis and Fats. But then she'd drink, and that old Addie would immediately go away, and she was drinking a lot of the time. There were also moments during this time when Zack would laugh. He would play the drums. He would joke with the regulars at the bar, kiss Addie on the street like they were still those lovers from that New York Times article. But then he'd hear a helicopter or fireworks, and his body would lock up. He'd disappear inside himself, unreachable. And Addie, who was desperate for control pretty much at all times, when Zack would do this, he would disappear into himself. She would explode. And by the end of that summer, they weren't really a great couple. They were more like a bomb that was counting down. And both of their fingers were on the detonator. October 2006. The air was heavy with the kind of heat that clings to you long after summer should have left. New Orleans was alive again. Tourists were back, bars were crowded, jazz was echoing down the streets. But something about it still felt kind of off, like the city had healed too quickly, just covered up its wounds with glitter and gumbo. And in the middle of all of this, Addie and Zack were trying, again, to start over. They'd found a new apartment. Addie swore that things would be different this time. This time, they were going to build a life together. And Zack wanted to believe her. He signed the check for the first month's rent and deposit without hesitation. But when he found out that she'd gone behind his back and signed the 6-month lease in her name and her name alone, cutting him out entirely, something inside him went kind of cold. Still, they moved in together. A small apartment on North Rampart Street, perched directly above the Voodoo spiritual temple. Addie loved it immediately. She called it their fresh start, because nothing says fresh start like moving in over a voodoo temple. Zack just nodded. He learned not to argue with Addie's unyielding hope, even when he didn't really believe in it anymore. The apartment wasn't much. It was 2 rooms, a small kitchen, creaky floors, and a balcony that overlooked the street. But it had a lot of light, and Addie loved the light. She wanted more of it, so she painted the walls gold. She filled the rooms with candles, incense, and the smell of cheap rum. She danced barefoot on the wood floors while Zack watched her from the couch. They laughed, played old jazz records, and made plans for a future that both of them really wanted, but somewhere deep down probably knew would never come. Still, for a moment, for a few moments, it worked. They were smiling again. They were cooking. They were drinking less. Well, they were drinking a little bit less. Friends say that they seemed happy, almost normal. But almost normal only offers kind of a fragile kind of peace. And pretty quickly, behind the closed doors of that upstairs apartment, things began unraveling. Again. Addie's mood swung like a pendulum, ecstatic, then cruel. Zack would retreat into silence, his mind looping back to Iraq. Zack didn't tell anyone how bad his PTSD had become, and Addie told everyone how badly Zack treated her. One night she called a friend and said, "Everyone loves him, but he's not who they think. He's dangerous. He's fucked up from the war." And then just a few days later, she called that same friend back and said, "Oh, no, we're fine. We're happy. We're better now." Neither was really true. As if their own, demons from their childhoods weren't enough to deal with as they're trying to do this fresh start. Money was running out. Again. And quickly. Zack's child support payments were way behind, and Addie's hours at the bar were pretty spotty. They were still using lots of cocaine, thanks to Squirrel, who declared every drop-off that he made that this would be the final delivery. Until, of course, the next delivery. The reality was, the only thing that was more dangerous to Addie and Zack at this point than the drugs was each other. Their love had kind of turned into an addiction of its own. 2 people chasing the high of the hurricane, desperate to feel something again. Still, they played house. with played obviously being the key word, because at this point it was just all make-believe. They were living in their own pretend world, which maybe they always had been, but that world had never been quite as dark as it was now. Still, to the outside world, they were keeping it together. Everything kind of still looked magical. Friends saw them walking hand in hand down Rampart Street, laughing, smiling. But what they didn't see were the nights that Addie and Zack spent screaming at each other, viciously fighting until dawn. In the early hours of October 5th, a neighbor heard Zack and Addie arguing. Voices raised, sharp, cutting through the still night. Then came a loud crash against the wall, and after that, silence. Moments later, music drifted through the floorboards into the neighbor's apartment, a sign, the neighbors hoped, that the fight was finally over. And they heard no more voices that night, no more shouting, no more anger, just faint, peaceful melodies. What the neighbor didn't know was that they'd actually never hear from Zack and Addie again. Outside the apartment, life was carrying on. Jazz groups playing on the corners, street performers twirling fire, tourists, as always, stumbling through the French Quarter, blissfully unaware that what would eventually become one of the city's most infamous stories was just beginning to take shape. Inside apartment B, the air had gone still. The candles had burned all the way down, and a young woman who had once danced barefoot in a hurricane had fallen silent. The Omni Royal Orleans Hotel sits in the heart of the French Quarter, elegant, historic, and just far enough away from Bourbon Street's bead-slinging madness to forget, for a moment, that the rest of the city is crawling with chaos. It was October 17th, 2006, a Tuesday. The sky was clear, the air, as usual, was thick, and Zack Bowen was standing on the Omni's rooftop bar, smoking a cigarette and staring down at the city he had once loved so much. At first glance, he looked like any other man who'd come to watch the sunset, though perhaps a bit more handsome with his tall frame, blonde hair, and always tan skin. But up close, it was clear that he wasn't like the other men that were there. He was a man coming apart at the seams. He ordered a Jameson, then another, then another. He sat alone by the pool, writing in a small notebook. Bartenders noticed that he was polite, quiet. He tipped well, he smiled when spoken to. Nothing about this man said monster. Nothing about him said murderer. For the next few hours, Zack drank and smoked, alternating between pacing the deck and staring over the railing. The rooftop band played a soft Latin rhythm, laughter in the night air. And there he was, this man who had survived 2 wars and a hurricane, looking calm, almost peaceful, but who on the inside was unraveling quickly. No one could see the weight he carried, the guilt, the rage. Just like no one could see the dog tags that were zipped inside a small plastic bag, or the folded note tucked into his pocket. The exact note that would soon turn the entire city's stomach. At 8:30 p.m., Zack stood. He stubbed out his cigarette, and then he walked to the railing overlooking the French Quarter. He climbed up, paused, and stepped off. 5 stories down, he landed on the roof of a parking garage. The impact echoed across the block. On the ground below the rooftop, the scene quickly dissolved into chaos. Crowds gathered, police tape went up, paramedics crouched beside the broken body of a man who had just fallen from the roof. Detectives moved in quietly, taking photos, tagging evidence, searching his pockets. And that's when they found the note. Under the glare of the hotel lights, officers read the words in stunned silence. The note read, "This is not accidental. I had to take my own life to pay for the one I took. If you send a patrol to 826 North Rampart, you will find the dismembered corpse of my girlfriend Addie in the oven, on the stove, and in the fridge, along with full documentation on both of us and a full signed confession from myself, Zack Bowen. The words themselves were simple. Their meaning, horrifying. In one paragraph, Zack had confessed to a murder so brutal it would scar New Orleans forever. 2 officers were dispatched to the address in Zack's note, and at first they thought this was some kind of twisted prank, one final act of madness from a man who'd just leapt to his death. The building's landlord, Leo Watermeyer, who ran the Voodoo spiritual temple shop below, met them at the door, half asleep, confused. He said, this is the wrong place. But one of the officers read the address again slowly this time, and Leo's face went pale. The apartment was upstairs, directly above his shop. Leo's hands shook as he fumbled for the key and handed it to the officers. The officers climbed the narrow staircase, got to the front door, and as the lock turned, the door swung open to a wall of cold air and silence. Inside, the air conditioner hummed, set to a frigid 60 degrees. Beer cans covered every surface. There was a half-eaten sandwich on the counter, a pack of Camel Lights beside it, and cigarettes filling every ashtray. Random messages were spray-painted on the walls, in black. Please call my wife. I love her. I'm a total failure. Please help me stop the pain. And then officers came upon one message that really stood out. Only 4 words, big block letters, written across the kitchen wall with an arrow drawn beneath them. Look in the oven. It took officers less than a minute to realize that the note in Zack Bowen's pocket had not been a prank. And it would take them a lifetime to forget what they saw inside that oven, inside that apartment. Staring at the instructions on the kitchen wall, the first officer hesitated. He'd seen gore and death before, drownings, shootings, the aftermath of Katrina. But this somehow felt different. Everything in his body told him not to open that oven door. But he didn't listen. He briskly swung that oven door open and instantly wished that he hadn't. And just like that, the apartment above the Voodoo temple became a horrifying part of New Orleans legend. Beyond the note in Zack's pocket, he had also left behind an 8-page confession in Addie's notebook. His handwriting was neat, deliberate, no rage, no panic, just a fatal calm. Inside, his note began, quote, "Today is Monday, October 16th, 2 a.m. I killed her at 1 a.m. Thursday, October 5th. I very calmly strangled her. It was very quick." Then his tone shifted, a bit more cold and detached. Halfway through the task, I stopped and thought about what I was doing. The decision to halt the first idea and move to plan B came after a while. I scared myself, not by the action of calmly strangling the woman I've loved for 1.5 years and then desecrating her body, but my entire lack of remorse. I've known forever how horrible of a person I am, ask anyone, and decided to quit my jobs and spend the $1,500 cash I had being happy until I killed myself. Good food, good drugs, good strippers, good friends. I had a fantastic time living out my days. It's just about my time now. Those were the last words that Zack Bowen ever wrote. No goodbye to his family, no letter to his kids, just a kind of detached record of destruction written in a notebook that once belonged to the woman he killed. He claimed that he wasn't sure why he did it, only that he had to, as if breaking her apart, killing her and then breaking her apart piece by piece might somehow quiet the chaos in his own head. But in truth, Zack was fracturing. His mind was splintering under the weight of what he had done. That first night, drunk beyond comprehension, he fell asleep beside Addie's dead body on the futon, but allegedly not before he committed necrophilia. By morning, October 6th, only one of them was still breathing. but in every way that mattered, both of them were completely gone. Later that morning, Zack went to work, trying to act as if he hadn't just killed and hacked apart his girlfriend mere hours before. His coworkers noticed that he was uncharacteristically silent and that he felt a bit off. I mean, maybe it was the fact that he was wearing sunglasses inside the whole day, or that he would not make eye contact or speak to anyone. Weirdly, no one asked him why he was wearing sunglasses or what was going on or if he was okay. Over the next several days after he killed Addie, he moved through their apartment like a ghost. He drank, he smoked, and he cut her body into pieces, trying to make the horror of what he had done disappear, bit by bit. When police arrived, they found Addie's head inside a pot on the front burner of the stove, her tiny hands and feet in another pot on the back burner, her limbs in a roasting pan inside the oven, and her torso wrapped in black plastic bag in the refrigerator. Investigators confirmed that her remains had been cooked, though they did not believe it was for consumption, but rather to strip away the flesh and hopefully slow the decomposition. Zack had been living among all of this, the decomposing body of his girlfriend, for nearly 2 weeks. He slept there, ate there, and he convinced himself that if he didn't look directly at the nightmare of his own doing, maybe it would stop being real. In those last days, he burned 28 cigarette marks into his own flesh, one for each year of his life. He spent the last of his money, as he said in his note, on drinks, lap dances, and cocaine, and then he went to the roof of the Omni Hotel. When the story broke, it hit the city like a second hurricane. The press called it the Katrina Cannibal, even though no such thing had actually been confirmed. Tourists whispered about the Voodoo apartment, and locals, many of who had survived the same flood and dealt with the same trauma, were furious that tragedy had been turned into spectacle. Addie's friends remembered her as a firecracker, a poet, and a survivor. Zack's mother remembered him as a boy who came home from war, broken. And together, they became kind of a symbol of post-Katrina New Orleans, beautiful and ruined at the same time. The building where they lived still stands. There's now a shop on the first floor. It's part Voodoo museum, part tourist attraction. And the apartment above is open for guided tours. So you can pay, as many people do, to walk through the same rooms that Addie and Zack turned into their final chapter of life. People go and gawk at the same walls that once held horrifying messages, stare at the oven that contained unimaginable things that never belong in an oven. And many times people leave saying they felt something ghost-like in the apartment, cold, heavy, unexplainable. New Orleans has always lived in contrasts. Beauty and decay, light and shadow, joy and grief. It's a place that carries its ghosts quietly in the music, in the air. And the story of Addie Hall and Zack Bowen still, to this day, lingers there, not because it was sensational or sensationalized, but because it was human. It was two people, damaged and desperate, who were searching for peace in each other and lost their way. People call the apartment above the Voodoo temple haunted, and maybe it is. But if ghosts do linger there, they aren't trying to scare anyone. They're there to remind us of what happens when pain goes untreated, when trauma is romanticized, and when love is used as a bandage instead of a lifeline. Because love didn't kill Addie Hall. War didn't kill Zack Bowen. What killed them was everything in between. The silence, the self-destruction, the need to try and feel something more than the pain they felt. So maybe the haunting isn't in the walls. Maybe it's in the stories we tell ourselves about what love is supposed to fix. Or maybe it's in the way that people like Zack and Addie keep finding each other in bars or hurricanes, trying to essentially build homes together on fault lines. And maybe the real ghost is the part of us that looks at this story and thinks, that could never be me. And that is it for today's episode, guys. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Death by Southwest. I am excited to be back after a long time gone. My plan is to be very consistent, especially right now with my favorite month ever in October, and have lots of Halloween themed or related episodes. I'm pausing because I don't want to say too much. I know it's the end of the episode and you can just turn it off. People who don't want to hear about me can just turn it off. But I also am trying to just be more concise and more true crime focused and keep all of the other stuff on Patreon. And when I say all the other stuff, I really just unload on there. But I have, since I did share, I will do a bonus episode, like I said, but since I did share and so many people were so kind and generous and thoughtful and reaching out with job opportunities, like when everything kind of came to an end with Jim and, I was looking for a job and trying to make money and trying to pay my rent, while still producing some other podcasts, but not making money yet. And luckily I was able to obviously I'm still in, well, you can't see because I have this background up, but I'm still in my place. I was able to pay my rent and I actually have gotten a job, and I will talk more about it on the bonus episode, I guess. But I just want to say a really big thank you to literally everyone who has either stuck around over the years at this point of the ups and downs of this podcast, which tends to mirror my life, and certainly stuck around over the past few months while I was trying to get a job and figure things out. I have chosen to step away from any kind of podcast work at this point. So the job that I currently have has nothing to do with podcasting and or entertainment or media or anything. So Death by Southwest is now officially my only podcast endeavor, and I'm excited. It has kind of like reignited a spark for doing this in me when I'm not doing it for other people. I'm just doing my own thing, and I'm pumped about it. So that's the plan. I'm trying to learn to stop making promises like, for sure, I'll have 2 episodes every week, because then that doesn't happen. This was supposed to come out yesterday, guys. And I had it all written. I was so excited to tell this story. And I got asked to help out with a little writing project for this company I'm working for. And that job is my priority right now. So unfortunately, it is going to always come first. But it is a job that allows me plenty of time to do Death by Southwest, which I'm super excited about. So that's it. I would love to hear from you. If you have any suggestions for Halloween themed or Halloween related episodes, please definitely send them my way. I have for the past 2 months, while not doing this, I have done Patreon. I have continued to just like vomit into Patreon and onto all my patrons, everything going on in my life. I just feel like I'm like trauma dumping on them constantly. But not doing this podcast means that I obviously have not really partaken in social media. I did have like a run on TikTok. I was posting every day. I was like determined. I was like, this is going to be it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to stick to it. And I really, really was committed to it. And I was actually starting to have fun with it and just like, whatever, just posting things about my life. But, yeah, that it's really hard. It sounds stupid, but I found it really hard to want to put myself out there every day. So I guess I can understand why maybe people who like influencers or TikTok stars maybe like batch record and record a bunch of stuff because there was, over the past 2 months or whatever, there's been weeks where like I don't want to talk to anybody. Like I'm not interested in looking at social media, let alone posting on social media. I don't feel like sharing about myself or my life. There's weeks where I just like I turn inwards kind of and I just want to just do me. Um and then there's weeks where it's like, "Oh my God, let me share everything about myself on TikTok or Patreon." So the consistency I'm not, I've realized I'm not the kind of person who can be consistent about that. Geez, am I going into a bonus episode right now? My goodness. I guess this was only an hour. That's not exceptionally long. I thought for how long it took me to research and write this, I thought this was going to be like a 2 hour episode. But I did pull back on the actual crime I know was probably the smallest part in terms of like how long I talked about it. But and that's because I find New Orleans to be just amazingly enchanting, and I'm so taken by New Orleans. I really want to go one day. Uh and their love story. I was enthralled by it. I was so wrapped up in it and just what characters they were, um and I researched this for a long time, and I felt almost like I didn't want the murder and the terribleness of it to be the main focus. Uh, so I know this is a little bit different of a story than we usually do, or than I usually do, but I liked it, so that's why I told it. And where was I going with this before? I don't know, but yeah, I can't explain it. I've never done this podcast. I know I'm jumping around a lot, guys. Sorry. I've never done this podcast and had it be my only podcast. Like when I started this podcast, I was at Cavalry and I was producing multiple other podcasts and involved in multiple other projects. And so this was kind of like, it was like I didn't have to do it, but I had to do it. And even after, Cavalry ended and then working with Jim, um, I was still working on other, miscellaneous shows here and there, editing and had, little freelance jobs producing and editing. And this has just never been the only one. Death by Southwest has never been the only podcast that I've worked on ever. So it makes me excited to think about that now that podcasting, at least right now, is not my job, is not my career. This now feels even more fun. Like this feels like, well, okay, great. Let's just have a great time. And this has never like been an income really for me. So I don't know why it hasn't always felt that way, but I don't know. It's always come last on the list behind other podcasts. And now the other work that I'm doing has nothing to do with podcasts. So I'm going to say podcast 18 times. It's so annoying. So I'm excited. Excuse me. Anyways, uh, I think this just started as like I'd like to thank you for sticking around, and it turned into a monologue about God knows what. So let's go full circle and come back to thank you for listening. Thank you for sticking around. Thank you for supporting me. Thank you for those of you who sent some people sent money on PayPal. Um, People sent job suggestions, like people who live in Tucson said, "Oh, I've heard of a job here, or my company might be hiring," and I applied to those jobs, and it, even though I wasn't putting out true crime, I can't tell you how much it felt like this was a really supportive community, um, for me, which feels rude that it's not an equally supportive community for you guys. On Patreon, I think maybe it is a little bit, but yeah, I just I truly am grateful. And if you're if you've made it this far and you're just here for the true crime, I don't know what you're doing, but I'm going to really make that my focus. I know I've said that before, but all I can do is keep trying, right? And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to keep trying. So I'm going to sign off so that I can add a little bit of music to this and publish it, because it was supposed to be out Tuesday and then it was Wednesday and here we are on Thursday. But that is life, isn't it? And I really appreciate you guys for just understanding and sticking with me and putting up with me. So send me your Halloween suggestions. If you're in Tucson and you know of any really cool Halloween stuff, like definitely we're going back to the corn maze this year because that was the most amazing thing ever. I loved it. We're going to Apple Annie's. I'm not doing Slaughterhouse again because I was not impressed, even though this is their last year. I know this means nothing to anyone unless you live in Tucson. And maybe we're going to do Nightfall at Old Tucson Studios. We didn't do that last year, so maybe we'll do that this year. I'm trying to plan like one Halloween thing every weekend. This weekend, I don't have anything planned because it's 99 degrees out. Literally, today it's supposed to be 99 or 97 or something. Like, it just doesn't feel like Halloween. I haven't even decorated yet. And when I say decorated, I have like 6 decent decorations, and then I have like 20 really chintzy, crappy decorations from like the dollar store. And I love the dollar store, so no shade. I hate saying that. Not talking shit about the dollar store, but the decorations aren't like meant to last a lifetime. So when I was a teacher, I just had like a weird flashback. I used to make the decorations for my house, for mine and my ex's house, for Halloween, for Christmas. I had like a weird flashback just now to like making these Christmas tree decorations. Oh man. Yeah, I don't have it in me to do that again. So yeah, it just feels so hot here. It doesn't really feel like Halloween, and that sucks. Although at night it is starting to get pretty cold. But if anyone has any suggestions for Halloween type activities in Tucson or fun Halloween things happening this month in Tucson, please let me know. And otherwise, I will say thank you for being here. And as always, what do I say in my closing? Stay curious, stay safe, and stay out of the desert after dark. And come back next week for more true crime. If you are loving Death by Southwest, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and come say hi on Patreon, Instagram, TikTok, wherever. Although TikTok has kind of become like my personal TikTok. It's not really crime related. Though I think I'm going to make a social media video from this. I'm going to try today. Okay, I'm done. I love you guys. Thank you for listening. And happy early Halloween. Happy October. Okay, bye. Death by Southwest is a production by me and hosted by me, Margot Carmichael, produced, edited. It is a one-woman show around here. So these are the credits, and I'm giving them all to myself. Thanks for listening, guys.